"Do you trust in God, Dr. Peterson?" The priest's voice sliced through the conference hall like a blade. Jordan Peterson, seated alone under the soft glare of a single spotlight, didn't respond immediately. The room fell still, like it was holding its breath. Even the distant hum of the air conditioning seemed to fade. The priest stood near the front row, wearing a simple black cassock, his hands gently clasped in front of him. He wasn't hostile. He wasn't even pressing. It was the kind of question that didn't ask for a yes or no. It demanded something more vulnerable. And Peterson knew it. Behind them, the auditorium at the University of Chicago was packed. Students, professors, skeptics, believers, all eyes now locked on the man who'd built a career asking questions few dared to voice out loud. Peterson leaned slightly forward in his chair. His fingers, calloused from years of note-taking and lectures, tightened around the mic. You could see the pause wasn't out of hesitation, but from weight. "I think," he began, his voice lower than usual. He stopped himself. The word hung in the air, dry and hollow. A camera clicked somewhere in the back. The live stream count was rising fast. Peterson looked up, scanning the crowd as if trying to measure how much truth they could handle. Then his eyes found the priest again. Not challengingly, but searchingly. "You're not asking if I believe in God," Peterson finally said. "You're asking if I trust him." The priest gave a slow nod. Peterson let out a breath. "That's harder." Another silence. "I've spoken for years about the need for order," he continued. "Responsibility, sacrifice. The idea that there is something above us, something that judges us and that we must answer to. But trusting that force, that's different, that's personal." He ran a hand through his graying hair. "I've seen people broken by life," he said, his voice tightening. "I've been broken by it. I've begged, I've screamed. And sometimes, there was only silence in return." A woman in the front row shifted in her seat, biting her lip. Peterson's gaze dropped to the floor. "I want to trust," he whispered. "But trust means surrender, and surrender means risk." The priest remained still, as if guarding the gravity of the moment. No one else moved either. "I think," Peterson said again, lifting his eyes, "that's the question that never leaves me. Not whether God exists, but whether I can hand over everything, my grief, my intellect, my fear, and still call it faith." He paused, then added softly, "I don't know if I can, but I'm trying." And that, more than anything, seemed to shake the room. The priest didn't speak, not immediately. He stood there, his head slightly tilted, like he was listening to something far beyond the room. The silence he held wasn't uncomfortable. It was reverent, intentional. It gave weight to Peterson's words, like he was honoring them by not rushing to respond. The audience didn't stir. No shifting, no coughing, no phones, just eyes. And a kind of collective vulnerability that made the hall feel more like a chapel than a university auditorium. Peterson leaned back in his chair. His face was calm, but his fingers tapped the edge of his notebook, betraying the current running through him. Then finally the priest spoke. "Trying," he said softly, "is not failure." Peterson looked up. The priest took a step forward, then another. The room seemed to narrow, folding in on this unexpected exchange. "I've sat with men on death row," the priest continued. "I've prayed with mothers who buried their children. None of them ever said, 'I trust God completely.' Most of them said, 'I don't understand, but I'm still here.'" He paused, letting that sit. To try is to choose trust, even if only for a moment. Peterson swallowed. "But what if I'm just pretending? What if I only speak of God because I want there to be something that makes sense of suffering?" The priest nodded. "Wanting God to exist doesn't make your search less real. It makes it human." There was a quiet murmur from the back. Not disagreement, just the sound of someone exhaling emotion they didn't realize they were holding. "Do you pray, Doctor?" "Peterson?" the priest asked, gently now. Jordan looked out across the hall. "Sometimes, when I'm desperate." "And do you believe anyone hears you?" The words landed hard. Peterson's voice dropped. "Some days, yes. Other days, It feels like I'm just speaking into my own doubt." The priest didn't flinch. "Then let that be your prayer." Peterson blinked. The priest smiled, but it wasn't patronizing. It was familiar, like a man who'd stood in that very same place before. "Trust," the priest said, "isn't about being certain. It's about stepping forward when you're not. It's the decision to love, to hope, even when you have every reason not to." Jordan was quiet. The audience, still frozen in collective stillness, began to realize they weren't watching a debate. This wasn't theater. This was something else, something unfiltered and raw. Peterson finally nodded. "You said something once in a talk about wounds becoming windows." "I believe they are," the priest said, "but only if we stop hiding them." There it was. No theology, no arguments, just a conversation between two wounded men trying to find the edge of something divine. And everyone watching knew this was only the beginning. After the event ended, the crowd lingered. No one rushed out for selfies or autographs. They just sat there, like they needed time to return to the surface. Jordan gathered his notes quietly. The priest had already stepped aside, blending into the background as if he never meant to be the center of anything. Backstage, the light was dimmer. A student volunteer handed Jordan a water bottle. He nodded, thanked her, and took a long drink. His hand still trembled slightly. Then he heard it. Soft footsteps behind him. "Mind if I sit?" It was the priest again. This time, no microphone, no audience. Just two men in folding chairs under flickering fluorescent lights. Peterson nodded. Of course. For a moment, they just sat. No need to speak right away. There was something sacred in that silence. Then Jordan broke it. "I've been giving lectures for years, thousands of people, but I don't think I've ever felt so exposed." The priest didn't smile. He understood. "You said something earlier," Peterson added, turning slightly, "about people you've prayed with, about loss. You spoke like someone who's seen things." The priest gave a quiet nod. "I have." Peterson studied him. "Did you ever stop believing?" The priest looked down at his hands. "Yes, more than once." Peterson wasn't expecting that. His brow tightened. "There was a girl," the priest began. 4 years old, brain tumor. I visited her every week. She used to draw pictures of angels, though she'd never seen one. And then one day she stopped drawing." He swallowed hard. "I begged God to take me instead. I screamed into that hospital wall. I made promises I couldn't keep. And when she died, I stopped wearing the collar for a while." Jordan didn't say anything. He couldn't. "I didn't stop believing in God," the priest said. "I just stopped believing he cared." The confession cracked something open. Peterson leaned forward, elbows on knees. "What brought you back?" The priest's eyes lifted. "One night I found her last drawing. It was crumpled behind a chair in the hospital chapel. She'd drawn a man holding a little girl's hand. The man had tears on his face." Jordan frowned. "God?" "I don't know," the priest said. "But maybe she did." Peterson exhaled slowly. "I've been chasing God through logic," he said, "trying to build my way up to belief with bricks of reason. But moments like this, they don't fit into arguments." "No," the priest agreed, "they don't. They live in the space where language breaks." They sat quietly again. The fluorescent light above them flickered once more. Peterson finally said, "I think I needed to hear that." The priest nodded, then added, "We all do, more than we admit." Outside, Chicago wind swept through the alley, cold and sharp. Inside, two men, one with a collar, one with a broken voice, stayed seated, not quite ready to leave. The next morning, Jordan sat alone in his hotel room. The curtains were drawn back, revealing a crisp Chicago skyline under soft gray clouds. He'd barely slept. His mind replayed the priest's words like a record stuck on the same verse. "I didn't stop believing in God. I just stopped believing he cared." That line haunted him. He opened his laptop, intending to answer emails, maybe draft a new lecture. But instead, he stared at the blinking cursor on a blank screen. His fingers hovered over the keys, motionless. Then, almost involuntarily, he opened a new document and typed a single sentence. What does it mean to trust? He didn't mean it rhetorically. It was honest, raw, like something cracked open inside of him and was now demanding to be examined. The knock on the door startled him. He hesitated, then stood up. A staff member from the university stood in the hallway, holding a small white envelope. "This was left for you downstairs," she said, handing it to him. He nodded, thanked her, and closed the door. Inside the envelope was a folded piece of stationery. No name, just a short message, handwritten. "The silence doesn't mean absence. Sometimes it's the space where love waits to be chosen." There was a small drawing at the bottom, a man holding a child's hand, just like the one the priest had described. Jordan sat down slowly. Was it from him, or someone else who'd been at the talk? He ran his thumb over the ink, then set the note on the desk and looked out the window again. Below, people rushed down the sidewalks with coffee cups and backpacks, umbrellas tucked under their arms. Life went on, but inside something was shifting. He turned back to the computer screen. "What does it mean to trust?" he read again. Then beneath it he typed, "Maybe it's not certainty. Maybe it's choosing to return again and again, even when you're not sure anyone is listening." He paused. And then, maybe that's the beginning of faith. His chest tightened, but not in fear. It felt more like release, like setting down a burden he didn't realize he'd been carrying. He saved the file. That evening, he was scheduled to speak at another university. But this time he knew he wouldn't be quoting Jung or Dostoevsky in the first 5 minutes. He'd start somewhere else, somewhere quieter. He folded the priest's note and placed it in the inside pocket of his jacket. And as he stepped out into the cold air, Chicago's wind greeted him with a chill that felt less like punishment and more like permission. To be human, to not have all the answers, to begin again. The auditorium at Northwestern was smaller than the one in Chicago, but just as full. Students filled every row. Professors leaned against the back wall, arms crossed, curious. There was a quiet hum in the air, not just anticipation, but something else. Respect, maybe, or uncertainty. Jordan Peterson stepped up to the podium. No notes, no PowerPoint, just that quiet determination behind his eyes. He adjusted the microphone. "I want to talk to you," he began, "about what happens when the structures you trust fall apart." The room stilled. We often think of belief as certainty, as confidence, as having the answers. But I've come to think, that's not faith. Not really. He looked out at the crowd, scanning the young faces. "Faith," he said, "might be what survives when confidence dies." No one moved. "I've spent years lecturing about responsibility, about meaning, about the role of belief in human life. But there are moments, personal moments, when all of that becomes theory. Moments when you lose someone, when you suffer, and there's no justice. When you call out to something higher, and the only reply is silence." He paused. "In those moments, you ask yourself, do I still believe? Not because someone told me to, not because it's useful, but because it's all I have left." There was a tension in his voice now, controlled but unmistakable. He took a breath. "Yesterday, someone asked me if I trust in God." Heads tilted. Some knew the context, others didn't. And the truth is, I don't know. Not fully, not yet. But I do know this. I'm not running away from the question anymore. A murmur swept through the back of the hall, but it wasn't distraction. It was something closer to recognition. "I've seen what happens when people are handed answers too early," he continued. "They don't hold. They collapse under real grief." He stepped away from the podium now, voice more natural, more like conversation than a lecture. "But when people are given space to wrestle, to doubt, to fall and stand back up again, sometimes that's where real trust begins." Someone in the front row wiped their eyes discreetly. "And maybe," Peterson added, "faith isn't about climbing upward toward God. Maybe it's about staying in the room, even when you can't hear anything." He looked down for a moment, then back up. "There's no conclusion here," he said. "Just a beginning. For me, maybe for some of you." The room was still. No applause. Not yet. just silence. But this time it felt full, not empty. He stepped back, gave a slight nod, and walked off stage. Backstage, someone approached him, hand extended, ready to congratulate him on the lecture. But Jordan just smiled softly and said, "That one wasn't a lecture, that was a prayer." 3 days later, Jordan sat in a small church just outside Evanston, not as a speaker, not as a guest, just as a man. The kind of place with wooden pews that creaked under your weight, where stained glass windows filtered morning light into fractured colors across the floor. There were only a handful of people scattered throughout the sanctuary, an old man reading from a worn Bible, a young mother lighting a candle, a teenage boy sitting stiffly, earbuds still in. Jordan didn't come for the sermon. He wasn't even sure why he came, but when he walked in, he didn't leave. He sat in the last row. No one noticed him, and he liked that. The anonymity. The space to just be. He stared at the crucifix for a long time, not as a symbol, not as a debate, just as a question. For a moment, his mind reached back, past the lectures, past the interviews, past the expectations of being Dr. Jordan Peterson. It reached to something quieter, a memory. He was a boy again, kneeling at his grandmother's side, eyes closed, not really knowing what prayer meant, but doing it because she did, because she whispered with tears in her voice. And somehow, even back then, he sensed that those tears weren't weakness, they were connection. The door behind him creaked open. He turned. It was the priest. No collar this time, just a dark coat, a scarf, and that same calm presence. He didn't sit beside Jordan. He didn't interrupt. He simply entered, walked a few rows forward, and sat down by himself. Jordan watched him for a moment, then looked back at the altar. The silence stretched. Then he heard the priest's voice, soft, not turned toward him, more like a thought spoken out loud. Sometimes the only prayer we have is staying in the place that still feels confusing. Jordan didn't respond. He didn't need to. He pulled the small folded paper from his jacket pocket, the one with the drawing, the one someone had left him days ago, and set it beside him on the pew. The light from the stained glass touched the edges of the page. "I'm not there yet," Jordan finally said, his voice low. "But I haven't walked away either." The priest nodded, still facing forward. "Then you're closer than most." Jordan stood after a while. He walked slowly down the aisle, past the pews, past the quiet lives of others holding their own silent hopes. At the door, he turned back one last time. The priest looked over his shoulder. Their eyes met. No words this time, just a quiet understanding between two men who had stopped looking for easy answers and started making peace with difficult truths. Jordan stepped outside. The morning air was cold, but he didn't button his coat. He didn't need to. He just walked. No destination, no plan. Just the next step, and the door behind him stayed open. Days after returning to Toronto, Jordan sat alone in his study. Books lined the shelves like old friends he hadn't called in a while. A yellow legal pad rested on the desk in front of him, mostly blank, except for a title written at the top in careful handwriting, "Letters I Never Sent to God." He stared at it for a while. Then slowly he began to write. "Dear God, I don't know if this is belief or just the longing for it, but I'm writing anyway." He paused, tapping the pen against the wood. The window behind him showed a gray sky. Late afternoon snow began to fall, soft and soundless. "I used to think faith was for the naive, a shield against the unbearable. But now I wonder if it's something more, something quieter. Not a shield, just the decision to keep my heart open, even when everything in me wants to close it." He stopped again, then wrote, "I don't know what you are, but if you are anything like the silence I've sat in lately, the kind that doesn't condemn but waits, then maybe I'm not as far away from you as I thought." He folded the page, slid it into a drawer, and closed it gently. He didn't need to send it. Writing it was enough. Outside, the snow kept falling, quiet, steady, covering the ground in something soft, something that looked, if only for a moment, like peace. Si esta historia ya te tocó el corazón, suscríbete al canal y cuéntanos en los comentarios. ¿Qué crees que está pasando realmente? Ahora continuemos.